this is a problem, and so that's the reason shut out the outside world. So Japan cannot communicate with outside world people, and also outside people they cannot touch to Japan. Politician and business person the same. But Japanese, they don't know what is their special person are they, but they do not know. Why I know, because I studied a lot of overseas, cultures, politics, everything else. 87 countries there, I got to know. Japan is different from the rest of the world. Good or bad, okay? Not only good, but also bad things. This is very risky, but Japanese need to tell outside Japan. We try to explain who we are. Otherwise, more isolate. Finally, before the 100 years ago, we started to war because lost communication. American people misunderstand Japanese. Not reliable, not trust building. As you know, we cannot trust him, right? Misunderstanding. And Truman said, I put on the sentences on Kimoto's presentation. My seminar presentation. Truman said,
So,
by the way, this material is paper for handed out for American group.
yes, yeah, that's what. So basically, it's not completely done. Just one page. It should not be much more, actually. So the title, Japanese Culture Explained. There's one constant in Western culture, and that is change. Throughout history, we have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. People have been moving and mixing. We have engaged in wars, trade, and colonialization. Our history is still relevant. It has shaped our culture, who we are today. And even though we are changing today, we cannot deny the influence of our
No,
past.
you just plug in. You can't do no plug in. Plug it in.
I don't think then. Okay, so there is one constant in Western culture, and that is change. Throughout history, we have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. People have been moving and mixing. We have engaged in wars, trade, and colonialization. So that's the perspective of the Western reader, right? Our history is still relevant. It has shaped our culture, who we are today. And even though we are changing today, we cannot deny the influence of our past. For example, there is an obvious process of secularization happening in Europe, and in lesser extent the US. We could argue that the influence of the church is dwindling, but this completely ignores the fact that Christian values are still dominating our culture. Even though only a few people visit church today, we cannot understand Europeans or Americans without understanding Christianity, even today. The same is true for Japan. The situation here was different from the rest of the world. Japan is an island, a monoculture. We long lived in isolation and stability. A lot of our culture and history is indigenous to Japan. Things radically changed when we opened up in the Meiji era. Japan made vigorous efforts to catch up with the West. Japanese history is still relevant. It has shaped our culture, who we are today, and even though we have changed, we cannot deny the influence of our past. For example, since the Meiji Restoration, Japan is trying hard to globalize. We could argue that the traditions of Edo era are disappearing, but this ignores that the values of the Edo era are still dominating our culture, even today. There is no stronger weapon in international affairs and business than trust. The lack of trust between Japan and the rest of the world led to World War II and is still hampering relations today. Clyde Uno served as representative director of Accenture Japan. Business flourished, but he had many problems building trust relations with his Western counterparts. Reflecting on this, he realized that not your product, but your capacity to build trust is key to your success in business. In response to this, he vigorously studied international and Japanese affairs, culture, and history. He currently teaches Japanese executives how to build trust relationships and wrote close to 50 books about Japanese culture, philosophy, history, and international affairs. If you want to build trust relationship with Japanese, scratching the surface is not enough. Even though we engage with Japanese on a daily basis, do we really know what goes on in their minds and in their hearts? Truth is, if you would ask them, they would probably not be able to explain it to you. But then, would you be willing and able to explain what goes on inside your brain, in your heart? There, I need to finish this. Basically, then, basically we need to look at history and.
Why don't you type it in?
Now?
Yeah, no.
No, I can type it in tonight afterwards.
Oh, after.
But それで OK.
Of course, it's very high level sentences.
but do you agree?
Yeah, and
Okay.
they're going to ask me, so what?
No, not so what. I think actually, so what? So the point is, why did I do it this way? Because first, if you want to persuade people that you can help them, you need.
Much more. This is directly influence you to get much money, much more.
But do you understand that basically what is obstructing many people, foreigners in Japan today, is that they don't understand what the hell these Japanese are thinking.
Oh, this sentence is very good for top executive. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Okay. But the younger people, I don't know.
Right.
Right? Younger American, I don't know. This is.
But
Anyway.
So basically, so the key is trust. You need to kind of understand that people are not just the product of.
Oh, you have question for her?
Did I write it this way? So basically, we want to actually persuade people that we can help them, right? So Uno-san is going to help them, and with something very important. Basically, to be able to build trust. And why is trust important? Because only with trust you can build business, right? So first of all, I don't talk about Japanese. I talk about Americans. I talk about Europeans. Why? Because I can tell you a lot about what I did and what I made, but it's about me. When you want to persuade somebody, you want to talk about them. So first, I can try to talk about what I did, but basically I want them to recognize the problem by talking to them, about them. Because if I understand them, maybe I'm capable of helping them, right? So if somebody is being bombarded with information, so first of all, the first step is to establish that you understand them, what's on their mind, right? So I start to talk about, okay, basically, this is your culture. This is where what is typical for your culture. So constant change, and people have been at war and trading and a constant exchange of culture. So that is what binds us. Change is constant. But basically, even though we change a lot, it doesn't mean that we can forget about our past. Because, like, for example, the church in Europe and in the United States is becoming less and less important because people stop to go to church. However, to say that the church is no longer relevant today is not true, because actually, even though we don't go to church, we still have the same cultural values that we had before, and the cultural values come from the church. So even though we don't go to church anymore, we still kind of have the same culture, the same cultural values, and they come from the church. So if you don't understand the role of the church and what the church was doing, then you don't understand European culture. This is understandable for the people you're trying to sell. It has nothing to do with Japan yet. Now the problem is that in Japan it's the same thing. Instead of the church, we talk about Confucianism, for example. We talk about Edo era. Even though times have changed, even though since the Meiji era we have tried to westernize, we have tried to globalize, you cannot understand the Japanese if you don't understand their traditional cultural values from the Edo era, because that is still playing a very important role in Japanese society. So if you want to understand Japanese, and if you need to understand Japanese, because otherwise you cannot build up trust relationships. Without trust, there is no business. So if you want to understand Japanese, if you want to do business in Japan, you need to understand Japanese. If you want to understand Japanese, you need to be able to understand and be aware of their history. Because that shapes who they are. That's what they are thinking. That's what